Yes, people, I hope you're all doing well. So today we are going to break down my latest release, The House, which is out now on Cuff Records. So let's waste no time and get straight into Ableton.
Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop.
Okay, so here is the project itself. So if you've listened to the track already, you know it's a bit different from the stuff I've been putting out recently, especially my recent releases, stuff on Issues and Short Circuits and so on and so forth. But it's still a super cool track, and a lot of the sounds and the principles in here are still fundamentals of what makes the Brendan James sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play it from this break to a little bit further on, just so you get vibe for the track if you haven't already listened to it.
Now the place, the vibe, the rhythm, the sound, the time, the place, the house, the sound, the place, the vibe, the rhythm, the sound, the time, the place, the house. The place, the vibe, the rhythm, the house.
So there you go, you get the idea of it. It's super stripped back compared to a lot of the stuff I've been making, but it's still got that sort of glitchy rolling feel, and yeah, the bass is a lot different to the sub basses and sort of respaces that I usually make. But we're going to go through it bit by bit and break it down. So obviously if we start with the kick, nothing crazy, just a 909 kick, which I've got some drum bus on, some saturation, some EQ, and a dynamic EQ with the Neutron 3, which I'm also using some more saturation and compression to really get that punchy sound that I'm trying to get after in this track. Really nice sort of like crunchy, distorted kick, which pairs perfectly with the bass. So as you can see, the bass is split into two parts. So we have the bass with the low end in, which is from Sub Boom, and then we've got the top bass, which is from Sylenth. So this is an uncommon thing to do, especially in the tracks that I make. Why this is a good idea is because then you can get some more layers, some more harmonics from layering a bass on top of each other. Now you've got to be careful, you've got to make sure that they match up nicely with regards to frequency spectrum. So obviously these two they're pretty much square waves if we just listen to them. So you can tell when they're combined, it works really nicely. And with the kick, all sounds really tight and well put together. With regards to processing, these two are sequencers. I can't fully remember if I used sequencers to make this bass line in the end, but I must have been playing around with it to try and create some sort of bass line. I don't tend to use too many sequencers nowadays, but they're a really good starting point if you're struggling to write a bass line. Then we've got utility. So I've got bass mono, so anything below 95 Hertz is in mono. Anything above that I've pushed nice and wide. Then we've got an EQ. And a compressor, just trying to tighten that up. And then regards to the top layer, no processing really other than Stereo Savage, so I'm pushing it nice and wide, and that's what's creating that nice width to this bass line. Group processing, I always run my bass through a bit of saturation, especially if I'm having layers. The way you got to think about this is you've got two sounds going through the same saturation unit, so their frequencies are almost gelling together quite nicely. So that's why I like using saturation on a bus channel, and then I've got sidechain on the group instead of the individual elements. Button halfway through the video, but I just wanted to advertise my brand new website, brendanjamesmusic.com. So you can head to the link in the description of this video and go there. I'm offering now one-to-one tuition, mixdowns and masters, and in the coming few months there will be sample packs on there, and the next track from scratch series will all be on there. So please just check it out and let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you're going to use those services. If you're having struggle with the website, just drop me an email, which is on the website, or drop me a message on Instagram, and I will let you get back into the video. So yeah, nothing crazy going on in the low end at all. If we look at the MIDI notes of the bass, it's just playing a very simple pattern. And I believe this is in F minor, maybe minor blues. Can't fully remember. This track was made over a year ago, believe it or not. So, and this is just a very simple bass. You can sort of see the melody. It's not really doing too much crazy. It's what, 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, maybe six notes in total over 2 bars. It's just very catchy. There's unfortunately no magic recipe to making catchy and rememberable bass lines. It's just a case of trial and error. I do recommend having your track nice and full before writing the bass line. It just makes it a lot easier that way. But with this track, it's probably why I was trying to make stuff with sequences, because there's not much else going on in the track other than a few little random noises and obviously the vocal, which is sort of the main standout part of the track. So if we have a look at the drums, you can see, especially for how I usually make music, if you've watched any of my previous stuff, this is very, very, very stripped back. And a bit more raw, bit heavily reverbed compared to my usual stuff. So we'll just go through it, nothing crazy at all. So we have a snare instead of a clap, just sort of changed it up. When I was making this track, I was going through a bit of a stage where I was struggling to make music. So when I struggle to make music, I always try and make different things, like a bit outside my usual sound, but try and put my spin on it. And I've done that with 3 tracks within the month of last October, and all those 3 tracks have been signed. So that's super cool to see, and I highly recommend any producer doing that. It's just a nice way to change things up and really experiment and see if your sound can be carried across to slightly different genres. Processing on this one, distortion and the audio level destroyer, so just more distortion, giving it some really nice crunch, an EQ and a width plugin, so I'm just pushing out the top end. Closed hat, this is just a sample that I believed I have freezed and flattened, and again I've just pushed this out fairly wide, and it's not doing anything fancy at all. It's literally just on the offbeat. Same with this open hat. It's just a sample within my rack. Distortion, redux, which is we are reducing the bit rate, so again it's just making it more old school, a bit more raw feeling. And we have some hats for shuffle. And we've got some more hats for shuffle. It's pretty much the same sort of thing. 707 open, which is gated. A rim shot. And a 707 ride, I believe. Nope, this is just a ride from a sample pack. So that's it for the drums. They're really, really simple, but all together they do sound really nice and tight. And this is something I've talked about in previous videos as well, making sure when you're building drums, percussion, that everything sits in the similar sort of frequency spectrum, similar tone. So you're not necessarily working in key, but your sounds are all of a similar tone, so then they start to work really well together and sound very cohesive and as one within a group. And that's how you can get these really nice, tight and professional sounding drums. With regards to processing on hats and stuff, it's just a little bit of distortion, and I've made sure to use a reverb unit. I've been using this R-verb in this one with a drum verb. Nothing crazy, but that's helping with that sort of more old school feeling, having things a bit more reverb on, adds a bit more space to it, especially seeing as there's not too many drum stuff going on. And if we go down to the perk, again, I've said this a couple times in this video, but very unusual for my tracks to have only 3 perk channels in. Usually nowadays I've got like 15 or so, or something ridiculous. So this is quite an interesting little perk group. So the whole idea of this track when I started out was to have some sort of like hip hop sample and just create like a really old school stripped back beat, which is obviously what I achieved, but I didn't have the hip hop sample in this version obviously. But as you can see from here, I've used a acapella from Nas. And what I've done is I've pitched it down loads. Yep, pitched it down, added a beat repeat on it and some saturation and some EQ. And then I've got this effect here. So I've managed to create this sort of like glitchy perk from, you know, an acapella. And we've got this one here, which is just a part cut out from a loop, I imagine. And same with this one. It's just a sample cut out with beat repeat on it, so it's creating some sort of stutters and some little glitch hits in there. And I'm just going to skip over the vocal for the minute, because we're going to go down and have a look at sort of the sound effects, which are all here. The reason why I'm doing that is because there's a few sort of random glitch hits within the sound effects. So we can see here, random sound effects. And these are all things I've just cut out of acapellas, samples. I imagine I've pitched stuff. Yep, there you go. Plus 26. I've probably pitched that. Plus 38. Plus minus 37. And I've just added these in throughout the track. If we actually look, it's pretty much all the same sort of samples, but they're pretty much changing throughout the whole track because I'm just changing the pitch of them. So changing the pitch of a sound can add a lot of interest and dynamics and variation within a track without having to do much work. So I'd highly suggest getting some sort of glitch loop, some sort of sound effect loop, and chopping it up and then just changing the pitch throughout the track on certain parts. And you'll be surprised at how much variation you can get from just something so simple. Then we got another little random too. You know, these are all just sort of sound effects. Reverse bass hits. Again, I've pitched that down to create something a bit more unique. I pitched that down. That one's just a standard impact noise. That's been pitched down. So you can really see how I often will change the pitch of a sound just to make it more unique and different to the original sample. And a lot of the times you just get, you're just able to fit it better in your mix then. If you want obviously the sound a bit higher in pitch, then you go up. If you want it a bit lower and have a bit more low end, then you go down. Pretty simple sort of stuff really. And then when it comes to the textures, we've got this texture loop that I've just added in within the breaks, so it just comes in and out of a track, and just when there's sort of like short breaks like up here. So again, it just adds another layer to it, but nothing crazy with the normal textures. And then we get to the synths. You can see again, there's what, 1, 2, 3. 3 synths. 3 synths on my tracks, unheard of nowadays. But let's just go through them. This one, perk hit, which I've added a bit of reverb and a bit of delay to. And I've ran it through this Juno 6.0 chorus, which can really help bring some life to sounds and create a bit more of like an analog feel. I even believe this sound is stock Ableton, the FX Alien perk from my knowledge. So everyone should have access to that. Then we've got this weird pad by whatever it's called up here, which is freezed and flattened, but I believe this was a vocal effect that I had. I freezed and flattened it, and then I've just playing around with a filter. And then we've got another weird pad, which is more atmospheric. And from my knowledge, if I can remember correctly, this came from Analog Lab, which is a plugin that I've talked about in many of my previous videos. But for the actual beat itself, that is it. It's very minimalistic in its approach, but it really pays off and sort of hits hard, especially in the club setting. But obviously the vocal is probably the main part of this track, which is an a cappella, which I found on Beatport. And then I've just chopped it up and put it in time with my track, so that's why you can see all these little markers here. And with regards to processing,
The place, the vibe, the rhythm, the sound, the time, the place, the house.
I've got a compressor on, which is the Arvox one. This one's so good for vocals. I'd highly recommend it for compressing vocals. It has so many great presets that you don't really have to do much work. You just have to do some preset flicking. Stereo Savage, pushing it wider in the mix. Obvious with a vocal nowadays. And then Pro R, which is a reverb plugin, which I have used a preset called Vocal Wood Room.
It's now, the place, the vibe.
Which has just a nice rustic sort of feeling for the reverb. Really helps with that sort of vibe, old school feeling I've got with the track. EQ, sidechain. Pretty simple. We then have the affected channel underneath.
Now, the place, the...
Which, with regards to plugins, I've got Effectrix on, which is a preset. I might have altered the preset, but that is the preset name. And then we've got an effects rack on it with Echo Boy, and you can see I'm just playing around with the parameters. Nothing crazy with regards to effects there. It's just echo and modulating the time and the mix. It is important to note I've layered this underneath the main vocal. I often see a lot of people with the one-to-ones that I've been doing recently is they make some really cool modulated weird vocal effect, but then they have that as their main vocal instead of sitting it underneath the original vocal. If I just had this in the mix, it would sound too weird. You wouldn't be able to understand the vocal. Whereas if you layer it underneath the original,
house. It's now, the place, the vibe, the rhythm, the sound, the time, the place.
you can still hear every single word and all the phrases of the vocals, but you've got some weird modulation sort of sitting underneath it, which in my opinion works the best. Other than that, we just have this one vocal hit,
The house.
which is pitched down, which is even from the original sample, so I didn't even do anything to make that one. And that is literally a breakdown of the beat, so we will go over some arrangement stuff. And there you go, that is that video all over and done with. I hope you enjoyed it. It's very different to the stuff I've been making recently and been showing on this channel, but it's still super cool, and like I said, it's really good to challenge yourself and make new things and see if your sound can be applied to slightly different genres within the larger genre of house music. I'd really appreciate it if all you guys could go and grab a copy. It's out now on Beatport, the link will be below, and I will see you in a few days for another video.